All right, and we're live. Just wait a little bit for people to trickle in once they get the notifications. There are always a handful of people who seem to be apprised of my live streams earlier than almost anyone else. I talked about this a little bit on the previous live stream, the fact that there are people, about half, a little bit more than half. I have to check the analytics again, but hey, Tom. Our our outspoken mod has arrived. Hi, Nate. So there are some people that get advance notice of of my YouTube videos. Apparently, hi Matthew and Scott. On the other hand, there are people who find out about them almost as I'm ending the stream or after I've already completed the stream. They find out that I'm live streaming after I've completed the live stream, which is not optimal. You want to get the largest audience possible when you do these things, as opposed to the pre-recorded videos that are uploaded, which I tried once since the bad times. I don't know if you can use the word, but we all know what's happened over the past 9 months. Hey, Tower Time. And Christine. Hey, Erotical Love. All right, so we have a little bit of a crowd. I guess we can begin. And I don't really have a topic, but I wanted to talk about, and this is not only not timely, but it's incredibly trivial. I wanted to talk about the Mike Tyson Roy Jones Jr. exhibition match that happened this weekend. The whole thing was ridiculous, but the main card was a retired 55-year-old ex-heavyweight champion in the form of Mike Tyson taking on Roy Jones Jr., who I think he's held 4 or 5 titles, everything from welterweight to middleweight to light heavyweight. That was his highest, the highest weight class that he excelled at. And the thing I didn't want to bash Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson is a weird guy in general. There was this viral clip of him performing an obligatory Muslim prayer in what looks like a coffee shop. I don't know if you saw that. Harris Sultan actually played. It was a funny clip. He played it during his podcast, and Harris Sultan is a famous ex-Muslim YouTuber. He has an English language and an Urdu language channel, and he has a podcast called Harris's House of Sin, where he talks about these issues. But he actually played a clip from that, and I don't know where it was, but it was kind of funny that all of the Muslim apologists and the Ummah, the YouTube Ummah community was replaying that to say that Mike Tyson has become he's become a devout Muslim again, which I don't know how accurate that is, but based on Mike Tyson's own words, it sounds like more than anything else, he's a hedonist. It sounds like he's an atheist, because he actually has made comments about his non-belief in God in the past. I forget what the exact quote was, I can't paraphrase it because I don't even remember. But he was essentially saying that he doesn't believe in God because there's too much cruelty in the world or something, which is an odd thing for someone like Mike Tyson to say. But the upshot is, I don't think he's an Orthodox Muslim, but I think this is one of the issues you have with Islam when you have this sort of odd hermeneutic where it's all about engaging in ritualistic practices. So if you go to the mosque and if you say the Shahada, you're automatically a Muslim. And then if you go to the mosque and pray, or at least pretend to pray, you're considered a Muslim, at least for the purposes of taxonomy. Like Muslims love to add numbers to their to the global population of Islam, and it's ironic because if you look at all of the various Muslim sects which view each other as heretical or as Muhammad says, munafiq or munafiqin, i.e., hypocrites. This was a term he coined, which basically means Muslims that disagree with Muhammad. There were infidels and people who were non-Muslim, and they're condemned repeatedly in the Quran, but usually, sometimes within the same clause, he also condemns munafiq or munafiqin, which is the plural for munafiq, which basically means hypocrites. And these are people who are Muslims, but Muslims that in some way rebelled against Muhammad. So, Muhammad, in a sense, was the first takfir or takfiri. He was the first. This is why when people say that ISIS or Al Qaeda or any of these other, usually Sunni jihadist groups that go around murdering people, that they're somehow not in sync with Islam. The people saying that don't have a very strong grounding in Islamic doctrine, in Islamic text, because if they read the Quran and they read the Ahadith, they would understand that this is this is something that Muhammad, or at the very least the companions of Muhammad, the people who compiled the Quran, this is something that is inherent, intrinsic to this religion. Islam means to submit or submission. So it's the word itself. People bring up the fact that it's a cognate of salam, which means peace, but it doesn't really mean peace. It means submission or submission to Allah, basically. That's what the translation means. So, I mean, the people. This is something that's, despite the fact that Islam likes to boast about its numbers, it's kind of contradictory. The way when you look at how many Muslim groups anathematize other Muslim sects that deviate in some way from their preferred their preferred methodology. So, although it's a bit different in the West, in many places Sunnis will not consider Shia to be actual Muslims, and that's one of the reasons you see Shia internecine violence throughout the Middle East and Asia. In Pakistan, you have various jihadist groups warring against each other and killing innocent people who belong to a different sect. And Shias increasingly are being consigned to to the the outer limits of Pakistani society. They've kind of replaced the Ahmadis now that the Ahmadiyya have been pretty much marginalized and exiled and don't pose a threat. The Ahmadis are being replaced with the Shia, although it'll be a bit more difficult since the Shia comprise a a significant minority in Pakistan. Uh, so whether it's Sunnis, how they look upon Shia, or how both groups look upon the Ahmadis, or how the Wahhabis look at Sufis, and vice versa. The, there's really no accepted definition among Muslims of what a Muslim is, and this is one of the problems with making any sort of concessions to Islam. Even if you had a uniformly Muslim quote unquote state, you would still have violence. I mean, Somalia is technically, I think, 98% Muslim or 97% Muslim. I mean, there are undoubtedly a lot of secret believers and Christians living there, but the Christian population is only 1 or 2%, and yet it's replete with violence. No one wants to move to Somalia because Islam is an intrinsically violent ideology, and it's predicated upon the notion of coercion. But getting back to Mike Tyson, now that tangent is out of the way, I wanted to talk about the actual fight, the Mike Tyson Roy Jones fight. I know it's a bit silly in terms of for a topic, but and I didn't want to criticize Mike Tyson. I mean, he's goodness knows he's a flawed man, but I didn't want to criticize Mike Tyson so much as the Mike Tyson stands that you see. Yeah, neither one looked really bad. I presumably Mike Tyson looked much better. He was in better conditioning, despite the fact that Roy Jones had actually participated in heavyweight, not heavyweight, in professional boxing matches over the past couple of years, and Mike Tyson had been retired for 15 years. And the last fight, I think he was humiliated by this Irish boxer, Kevin McBride. So I have to say I was a bit wrong. I thought that Roy Jones, was going to put in a much better performance. Of course, it was an exhibition match, so they didn't really have judging. They had all of these stipulations, so it wasn't quite a real professional boxing match. But even so, Mike Tyson really, apparently, I didn't watch it, but apparently he put in a really good performance. So I don't have an issue so much with Mike Tyson, and it is impressive that someone who's in his mid-50s can perform well against a boxer who was fighting professionally up until I think 2 years ago or a year ago. Roy Jones obviously needed the money, which is one of the reasons he was still fighting in it, despite being middle aged. But yeah, I actually used to watch the WWF when I was a kid. During the golden age of wrestling, when they had Andre the Giant and Jimmy Superfly Snuka, who I believe committed homicide and was never charged for some reason. There's a Viceland documentary about that, I believe. They made I'm not sure. I think Mike Tyson was I think it was somewhere between $5 and $10 million. It was a large chunk of money. I mean, it wasn't as much as someone like Floyd Mayweather would command, but I think it was a large chunk of change. And it was supposedly part of this is some sort of promotional thing that Mike Tyson, an investment scheme that Mike Tyson was that was broached with Mike Tyson. So this is supposedly part of a multi stage entertainment endeavor. Yeah, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. He was a really good boxer. I mean, he's kind of an interesting guy because he was blacklisted basically because he wouldn't do certain things. He wanted to spend time with his family, and they actually they if you're into wrestling YouTube, there are a couple of channels that have done stories about this. He wanted to spend time after the birth of his child, his son. And there's this really cool, I forget if this was WrestleMania 4, one of the WrestleManias that shows him coming out and his son is dressed kind of like Ricky Steamboat. It's kind of cute. But yeah, apparently he was blacklisted by Vince McMahon because he wanted to spend time with his family instead of just wrestling nonstop, which kind of illustrates the character of Vince McMahon. Yeah, Joe Calzaghe was a great fighter. It's funny. Most of the lightweight, lighter. I mean, lightweights, featherweights, flyweights. They're actually much better boxers in general than. Once you get to super heavyweight or heavyweight, you don't have that many really skilled. I mean, maybe this is a generalization. My nose is itching. I apologize. I need to. But once you get to the heavyweight divisions, you don't have that many skilled boxers. I mean, there were you have some entertaining fights like the Tyson Fury Deontay Wilder fight was supposedly very. I didn't watch it, but it was supposedly an incredibly entertaining match. But the higher you go in weight division, the less skilled you get, and I think that's one of the issues I had with Mike Tyson. He was a very great. He was a very powerful fighter. In terms of strength, he was very impressive, but one of the reasons people overrate him is because and to a certain extent this isn't his fault, but he came about at a time when Sugar Ray Leonard was great. He came about at a time when the heavyweight division was sort of depleted. One of the things is they bring up the fact that he defeated Larry Holmes, but he defeated Larry Holmes, who was an underrated heavyweight. He defeated him at the nadir of his boxing career. So it's not that impressive. When you look at his most impressive victories, they'll bring up Holmes, but usually they'll bring up Michael Spinks and who is the other? Michael Spinks and oh no, I can't. I have a terrible. Yeah, I was trying to avoid rhyming. Michael Spinks and who was the other one? Burbick, I believe. So okay, they were good boxers. Michael Spinks obviously was a better boxer than Trevor Burbick. And he was so he was a very good boxer, and he was defeated at the peak of his career, so to speak. I think he was a champion when he was defeated by Tyson. I could be mistaken, but I think he was a champion, or was at least vying for the championship. But he was a very good boxer. But Michael Spinks was not an all-time great heavyweight. Like he was not I wouldn't even put him in the class of some of the heavyweights that actually defeated Mike Tyson. That's the thing. He only had a few very good victories, and when he was matched up against boxers who were A, not intimidated by him, and B, equally skilled or superior, he lost. So he was defeated by Evander Holyfield when Holyfield, I think, was 36 or 37. So this was on the tail end of his career. He was defeated by Holyfield, and he was defeated by Lennox Lewis, the British boxer, who is also kind of like Larry Holmes. I think he's underrated. just because he's not an American, and I think Americans tend to ignore boxing when there's no American. This was what happened when the two Russian fighters were heavyweight champions, the two Ukrainian Ukrainian boxers who wound up going into politics later on. Yeah, Larry Holmes was very underrated just because he was the champion after Muhammad Ali and before Tyson. Yeah, Vladimir and Vitaly Klitschko, the Klitschko's, and David Wood makes fun of this, how boring they were. And I think Americans have a problem with non-American heavyweight champions, even if they're very good, like the Klitschkos, who admittedly they didn't have the most engaging boxing style. They weren't aesthetically that great to watch. Or like Lennox Lewis. So Tyson, when he fought fighters of comparable skill, or fighters who weren't intimidated by him, like Buster Douglas, he invariably lost. And he would have lost more during the quote unquote peak of his career to these type of fighters if he had actually fought them, like Riddick Bowe, for example. Now, yeah, I do take vitamin C. Thanks, Christine. If he had fought Riddick Bowe, and this was one of the contentious things at the time, this was at a period when heavyweight fighters, back in the day, if you were a champion, you had to fight certain contenders. By this point, there were so many divisions, the IBF, the WBO, the WBA, the WBC, all of these alphabet soup divisions that promoters would stage manage their fighters, kind of like in Rocky 3, where Rocky's manager is trying to avoid fighting Clubber Lang, trying to avoid having him fight Clubber Lang. This is what heavyweight champions did in real life. Yeah, Tyson Fury is cool. I actually he like him. David Wood has actually talked about him on Act 17 Apologetics. But that's what heavyweight fighters did, and this is something that they did that stopped Mike Tyson from fighting Riddick Bowe. But if Mike Tyson had fought Riddick Bowe, and again, this is speculation. You can do computer models of this, or do like a computer game simulation, but you can't know whether this would have happened. But my suspicion is, if Tyson had fought Riddick Bowe, he would have lost, just like he lost to Lennox Lewis and Evander Holyfield and Buster Douglas. I mean, Riddick Bowe was at least as good, if not better, than most of those, with the possible exception of Lennox Lewis. I think he was defeated by Holyfield, but mostly because Riddick Bowe was perpetually out of shape. The problem with Riddick Bowe was that he was a good boxer. He was a good boxer, but he didn't have the discipline. So theoretically, if Mike Tyson had fought Riddick Bowe at after he had trained and actually prepared for a fight, if they were on equal standing, I think Riddick Bowe would have won. So what annoys me is the Mike Tyson stans who are trying to deceive people who weren't around to watch Mike Tyson during the 1980s and the 1990s. So they have nothing to gauge it against other than, the Instagram videos where Mike Tyson is pushing over a metal cage, or people online just gassing up how great Mike Tyson was, saying he was one of the all-time greats. So these people who are, Generation Z, particularly younger people who've never actually, who aren't real boxing fans, they'll just accept the premise that Mike Tyson is one of the greatest boxers of all time. And he was the predominant heavyweight for for that period from the mid 1980s up through the early 90s. So for about a 5 or 6 year span, he was the best heavyweight champion, and he was the best heavyweight, and he was a dominant heavyweight champion. No one's denying that, but the idea that he would have defeated, or that he's in the same league as previous as all-time great heavyweights like Rocky Marciano or Muhammad Ali, or even some of the or Joe Louis, or even some of the lesser heavyweights like Joe Frazier or George Foreman. I think it's just absurd when you actually go back and analyze what happened when he was actually fighting. Yeah, I mean, he has a lot of impressive highlights, but you have to consider that that most of the people he was knocking out were, to be honest, they were substandard. They were not great fighters. He was fighting at the time when the heavyweight division was very unimpressive. So in the mid 90s, when he started to fight more heavyweights who were of comparable skill, like Holyfield, like Lewis, he or heavyweights that weren't intimidated him, by, like Buster Douglas, he lost. Hi, Carolina. Again, crushing. Dairy Queen, I think I've only been to Dairy Queen once or twice. They're not bad. Like, aside from desserts, I don't know how. They're good for desserts, kind of like Wendy's, although Wendy's does have a good chicken sandwich. But yeah, you have to consider, like, those highlights. 90% of the time he's knocking out. It's kind of like those scenes in Rocky where you see Rocky knocking out these guys that Burgess Meredith calls tomato cans. Like I said, there were a couple of very impressive fighters that he knocked out, but those were not equally skilled. Like Trevor Berbick, Michael Spinks, Briggs. Even though these were competent heavyweight fighters, they were not on the same level as Mike Tyson. So him knocking them out in a round or two is not as impressive as it would have been if he had defeated Evander Holyfield or Lennox Lewis or Buster Douglas, which he didn't. Tyson ate his ear. Or something else. Another one, Andrew Galata. Andrew Galata was disqualified for low blows. He hit Mike Tyson in the groin. But if Andrew Galata was a more disciplined fighter, theoretically, he could have defeated Mike Tyson. I think he was defeating him in that fight before he just went crazy as Mike Tyson did in the Evander Holyfield fight. So, yeah. again, I'm not saying that Tyson wasn't a great heavyweight for his time, but to put him in the category of all-time greats, like Muhammad Ali or Joe Louis, or even like uh someone like Tyson Fury. If you would go if you took a time machine, if Tyson Fury had a time machine and went back, I think he would have defeated Mike Tyson. The thing was, Mike Tyson was a very powerful fighter. He had a good footwork to a certain degree, but he was not one of the top level fighters. So it's hard to say he would compete with Ali or Joe Louis or Marciano when he couldn't compete with the top heavyweights during his time. I mean, if he couldn't defeat Lewis and Holyfield and he had trouble with Galata and Buster Douglas, it's hard to make the argument that he would have defeated heavyweights who are universally regarded as the best in their sport in history. Yeah, Holyfield was the one who he chewed off the ear, and I think they wound up reattaching it. It was a bizarre. I mean, even for Mike Tyson, that was a very bizarre incident. So I don't have a problem with Mike Tyson so much as the reputation that the Mike Tyson stands have built, and it seems like they're trying to go overly credulous people who weren't around at the time into believing that Mike Tyson was one of the best heavyweights of all time. It's kind of, if I can draw an analogy, it's sort of like, for those of you who grew up in the 80s, who listened to music in the 80s, and were fans of Pat Benatar. Pat Benatar at one point was the most acclaimed pop rock musician in the country and perhaps on the planet. There was even a joke in the film Fast Times at Richmond High alluding to this fact, where it shows 3 or 4 different girls in the high school dressed up like Pat Benatar. They have the hairstyle and so I mean, Pat Benatar at one point, she was the most acclaimed pop rock, particularly female musician in the country. Yeah, she was the one. Because the night, she did. She did a bunch of big chart-topping songs during the 80s. And so the people who are raving about Mike Tyson and how amazing he is, imagine like people who are fans of Pat Benatar doing that in 2020, saying Pat Benatar is the best. Not only like was she the best, most famous rock musician in the 80s, but she's still the best. Like Pat Benatar, she's still like the top. She's still the best. And I mean Pat Benatar, I am actually a fan, so like she probably, her music even now is probably better than most of the pop music, but like she's not the most popular pop musician now. If you saw people online just gushing over how Pat Benatar is still the best rock songstress, like, most people would look at them as if they'd lost their minds. Oh, Dinosaurs. That was a fun show. Love is a Battlefield. Yeah, that was one of her biggest hits. So like that's akin to what you see with Mike Tyson fans. You see, it would be akin to people who are really into Pat Benatar trying to convince you that Pat Benatar is still, the best like pop star in the world right now in 2020. And like Mike Tyson is a 50-something-year-old man who, granted, he's in very good shape, but like even at the apex of his boxing career, he was not the best heavyweight boxer. So, needless to say, he would not have beaten, even if it were theoretically possible for him to fight, Ali or Joe Frazier or Rocky Marciano at their peak. He wouldn't have won those fights because he didn't win fights against the best heavyweights during his boxing career. It's just that simple. A Buster Douglas, yeah, who wasn't one of the best heavyweights. Like I said, anyone who fought him who was not intimidated and had some skill, or option B was equally skilled or superior, defeated him. So it's really kind of a specious argument to make the case that Mike Tyson was one of the all-time great heavyweights, or that he, much less that he could go into a boxing ring with a professional boxer today. Not someone like Roy Jones, who's on the cusp of retirement and is basically doing it for the money, but is in no condition to fight. But like fight, but like the idea that Tyson could defeat someone like Tyson Fury, like an actual professional boxer today, is just absurd. And Butterbean, Butterbean, yeah, yeah. I mean, there are some people who go to an extreme who just are, who say, like Mike Tyson was a bum, or that. Like, I'm not trying to make that argument. I'm just saying this hagiography of Mike Tyson is a bit overdone. That's true. Tyson Fury is not only an exceptional boxer, but he's a phenomenal singer. Anyway, that's my Dems my thoughts for the evening. Thanks everyone for coming. Scott, KK, Lisa, Alejandro, of course, Christine, Tower Time. I don't know if Nate's still here. I was going to talk about him now that he's gone, but seriously though, thanks everyone for coming. I only sing in church. That's the only place I sing where it can be masked by other voices. Yeah, stay in prayer, definitely. Anyway, thanks everyone. I will see you next time.